It was the 19th century, and imperialism was in full throttle. Britain, Germany, the United States, France, Spain, and even Belgium were grappling for control over less developed countries in South America, Africa, and Asia. But the main focus for this video will be regarding imperialism in Southeast Asia. These regions include modern-day Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Laos, Singapore, and a few other island nations. But you may be wondering, what is imperialism anyways? Well, to explain that, we must first look back to the Renaissance in Europe that took place a few hundred years prior. The Renaissance was a time of change. Philosophers all over Europe started questioning their current government systems and lifestyles. They came up with radical new ideas that propelled Europe into a new enlightened era. For example, Charles Montesquieu, a French philosopher, was one of the first to come up with the three-branch government system, with checks and balances to make sure no one power becomes corrupt. Jean Rousseau, a Swiss thinker, believed that people are all born good and should have equal representation in government. He thought that governments and rich people brought out the bad in people. All these ideas seem to be inherently good, right? Equal representation, rights for all people, both sound like things people can benefit from. And they did. Traditional government systems collapsed under the pressure of the people, giving rise to more democratic systems. But the catch is, with these new ideas, Europeans felt obligated to bring their ideas into other cultures that may or may not want the same things. They viewed themselves as superior because of their newfound knowledge and ideals. Now let's fast forward to the early 1800s, when Great Britain led in the Industrial Revolution. Agricultural techniques improved, factories were built, and demand for goods increased exponentially. And the best way to get resources for a cheap price? Of course, to just invade foreign lands, take their resources, rule over them, and spread their culture to them, whether they like it or not. So yeah, that's basically how it went down with most of these European countries and the United States. By this time, the Dutch had already conquered the East Indies, or modern-day Indonesia. Resources like oil, minerals, tropical agriculture, sugar canes, coffee, and rubber were plentiful in these regions. It also appealed to them because it was along the sea route to China, and it would make for a good place to rest or trade. At first, they ruled indirectly, keeping the Indonesian rulers in power, while putting themselves near the top of the social system, without causing too much of a dispute from the citizens. But it wouldn't be apparent for most of the people. With superior technology, there wasn't much the monarchs could do anyways. However, after a while the Dutch took direct control. They formed a rigid class system, with Dutch people on top, rich Indonesian plantation owners in the middle, and the farmers at the bottom. In 1819, the British saw what the Dutch were doing in the East Indies and wanted something similar for themselves as well. They saw Singapore as a perfect place to make for themselves a trading post, so purchased it from the few people that lived there. As the British started trading more and more with China, they felt they needed yet another base, and Malaysia was the perfect spot. Cash crops like rubber and tropical fruits brought the British much wealth, and it proved to be an excellent investment. Shortly after, the British Empire took over India and then Burma, which is modern-day Myanmar. British and Indian rulers alike all governed Burma, and the people hated it. Many conflicts arose, but Burma could not compete. Put under hard labor, many became poverty-stricken. The French started colonization in Vietnam in 1874, also because they wanted to establish business. Conflict arose between Vietnam, China, and the French, but most ended in disaster. The French did spread their culture and modernized most of its country, however. They changed the Vietnamese language from pictographs to letters. They were also responsible for implementing French baguettes into Vietnamese sandwiches. The same story goes for the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, Cambodia, and Laos. People with better technology imposed themselves upon unstable nations that weren't as developed. The only nation that successfully resisted was Siam, who had a stable government and a ruler willing to modernize and keep up. All this conquering and suppressing led to a lot of questions from modern-day philosophers. Why did so many people believe that doing all of this was right? Did people actually support these acts? And what happened to equal rights for everyone? Well, according to Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, one way of reconciling those apparently opposed principles was the argument known as the Civilizing Mission, which suggested that a temporary period of political dependence or tutelage was necessary in order for uncivilized societies to advance to the point where they were capable of sustaining liberal institutions and self-government. What it's saying is that these nations believed that sacrifices must be made in order to create a stable government, that a generation of hardship would secure a better and more civilized future.